Hi everybody. Longtime viewers of the channel may be familiar with this format of video. It's a series that I used to run back when I was just starting getting into Path of Exile content called Price Check, where I'd get a tab full of rare items together, ID them, assess them, and go over my thoughts as I did so in order to try and help other people learn through osmosis how I price items and how pricing of items should be done in general. I'm not perfect on the topic, but I have some decent knowledge and I wanted to help pass that on. This is by no means a full revival of the series. I think one of the big problems right now with that series and with continuing it, and one of the reasons why it stopped, was because mostly there's not very many rare items worth picking up nowadays, and that, to a large degree, honestly does include fractured items. But I've gotten a lot of requests and a lot of curiosity surrounding how should I go about assessing my fractured items, and I figured bringing back the format for a day in order to help to teach that would probably be a pretty good idea. So, to that end, I've gathered together a tab full of fractured gear here. A bunch of different random bases. I tried to get a good assortment of stuff. So I have chest pieces, gloves, body armor, a few weapons. Actually, a little light on weapons, but I got some shields, I got some jewelry, and we're going to sort through it. We're going to see if there's anything of value. I'm fully prepared for there to be nothing of value in here, but it will at least give you some insight into how I go about assessing these things, and maybe that'll help you in finding your next big fractured item jackpot. So let's get started and see if we can find anything half decent. Fill up those last few spots with some belts. Hello. And go and head on over to Navali, who I'm sure is going to be quite happy to purchase most of this stuff. Now, for those of you completely unfamiliar with the synthesis system, who are wondering, why are you vendoring those? You could synthesize them, you might get something great. I would definitely suggest that you go and check out Ziggy D's video on the subject, because he gives a basic grounding in synthesis and how it works in general. I will link to that in the description below the video, and I'm going to be in this video assuming that you know how synthesis works at its most basic function, and we're going to go over like how to identify when an item might have value to someone who's trying to synthesis craft. So the first check that I do is I'll look at the item and I'll see, is the locked in roll tier 1 or 2? This isn't, a complete test. This isn't a complete barometer for whether or not it's going to have value. But it is a very good first step, and it's going to allow you to vendor a lot of trash without having to give it a second look. Because I can already tell this chess piece is not worth keeping around. It's not a particularly good base, which would be our second step, but it's also got a T4 locked in lightning resistance roll. And if someone's trying to synthesis craft around a lightning resistance roll in a chess piece, in order to get the physical damage from hits taken as lightning, which is what I believe lightning resistance synthesizes into, they would need to have, I believe, strictly T1, possibly a high roll T2. So this wouldn't be functional for them. This wouldn't work at all. And if you're going to be synthesized crafting like that, you want the reliability of having the fractured mod be the one that you want to work with locked in, because it just makes it much, much easier. You can then scour down to this, you can regal it, you can annul, and you'll be guaranteed to isolate it, and it's a little bit expensive, but it's a guaranteed crafting method. So that is vendor food. This one is double fractured, which, number of fractured mods is also something that's going to factor into its value, but both of the rolls are really quite poor, even though Saintly Chainmail is actually the best armor ES base, hybrid, I believe. But that by itself is not enough to save it. I-84 T1 base, those are good things, but the fractured mod still has to be pretty decent most of the time. So we're going to go ahead and vendor that. 15 mana, T12, quite poor. 16 life, 16 chaos res, not particularly good. I do briefly look at the other rolls. It is possible for one of these items to just be good in its own right as far as the affixes are concerned, though that is rather unlikely with how competitive the chess piece slot is, with very good uniques in Shaper and Elder Gear. We have T2 light radius. Even mods like light radius and potentially flat armor. This is T1 flat armor. We're actually going to go and check and see whether or not that has a good implicit. I don't know offhand, especially on a Royal Bergonet base. That is T1 base. So this has some potential, depending on if flat armor is good for anything. But even rolls that normally as an affix wouldn't matter very much, like light radius, are in fact potentially quite valuable. For instance, getting T1 light radius on a bow, that's worth a good bit. And I mean 15% light radius hybrid with percent accuracy, because that allows you to synthesize a bow like this one with killed enemies explode, dealing percent of their life as physical damage, which is very powerful for quite a number of builds. So keep an eye out for basically any T1 roll and check and see if that has a good corresponding implicit, because that they just kind of threw them on at random. You don't really know. Yeah, it seems like honestly it was purposeful that a lot of the less used mods, as far as being proper affixes go in gear, things like Light Radius and Thorns, actually have good implicits that they key to. To a degree that it seems purposeful. This is perfect T2 int. This is 55. You cannot define a fractured roll, so it is important that it's top end T2 int. I believe this corresponds to a good implicit as well. We will go ahead and check that after we're finished sorting through the rest. T5 stun and block, goodbye. T5, T4 rolls, not really anything too good there. 8 strength, goodbye. 1 to 2 life regen. Also, Stygian Vises are super powerful as a belt slot, so it's really hard to compete with that implicit, even with synthesized implicits. So belts are generally not going to be that valuable. There's a few exceptions to that. And we came out of that with a couple helmets that are worth investigating further, which is rather nice. So we're going to go ahead and put in the effort to do that. With my magical scene transition, we'll head on over to this list. I'll have a link to this in the description as well. This has a very robust search function that allows you to, search with various different terms, and it sorts it really well. So what we can do is we can look for intelligence and helmet together. It does take a little bit to figure it out. There we go. And we can scroll down to where we have int as an explicit showing up on all of these different bases, but int as an explicit showing up on helmets. If we can get up over 160 intelligence and go to 161 between 3 bases, then we can unlock +1 max power charges as an implicit. You don't have to meet this roll, you just have to beat the previous one. So, can our roll of 55 be good enough to be used in that recipe? Well, simple way of figuring that out, 161 divided by 3, you would need at least 53.66666, however many, 7 intelligence on each hat. Or you could have a little bit less on one and a little bit more on another, potentially. But that means that ours, at the very least, is on average good enough to be used in this recipe, so it is useful in this recipe. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to the trade site, and we're going to look for intelligence on a helmet. This is a quick way to get to the fractured mod. I don't actually want this explicit intelligence roll. I want the fractured one, but if I click it and then click it again, I can go to the fractured mod really quickly. 54 is the amount that we needed on average on each helmet in order to reach that tier. That's what other people will be searching for if they're trying to do this recipe. And then we look at helmet, and then we look above eye level 80 because ours was 82. And the highest eye level helmet used is the one that the resulting helmet will be, so that has some value to these people, and 3 chaos into 5 chaos into swiftly all the way up to 10. So I think I'm going to be listing this for 10C. So that is a pretty decent find. There are definitely fractured items worth far more than that. The most I've sold a fractured item for, so not a synthesized base, but just a fractured item for, is 4 exalts. And that was a bow with 2 mods locked in place of life and mana gained on kill. Those sold because they were dead mods, which is not a thing anymore, so that's a whole can of worms. But yeah, basically the point is that fractured items can be quite valuable if you get decently lucky, as is the case with basically any rare. So let's look for flat armor on a helmet. So I'm going to search 2 armor because the syntax here is 111 2 armor. So that'll sort out some of the many different armor related rolls. And here we are. Armor on helmet gives phys damage reduction as an implicit, and flat armor. Phys damage reduction isn't bad, but I don't think there's going to be that many people searching for this. As a result, since it is on a good base and it is a good eye level, and that's not a terrible implicit to get, we'll go ahead and throw it up for 5 chaos. But that's kind of where I just put things that I can see someone potentially going for, but probably won't have super high demand. So let's move on to the rest of the tab here. Honestly surprised we found 2 items in just that first little inventory's worth that were worth investigating any further.
Welcome.
And that good T2 int roll should sell. I've actually had a few int helmets sell in the past, so that I'm pretty confident in. Double locked in rolls of life and mana, but not an amazingly high eye level and not very high rolls. This was close to actually just being sellable on its own merit with the affixes. It does have move speed, it has res, but the life and mana rolls are both low and obviously not changeable. That is T1 stun and block recovery. Don't know what that gives on gloves. On boots, it gives unwavering stance as an implicit. Might be good on gloves. We will check. That is T5 though, so that's vendor food. T2, T2 rarity, flat life regen. T6 stun and block recovery. Fizz gained as extra chaos is fire gained as extra chaos is a new explicit that can show up on shields and one-handers even just basic ones, so not even shape or elder touched ones. And I'm actually not certain at all what that might key to, so I'm going to look that up almost out of pure curiosity. Bad rolls there. T5 Dex. T1 rarity, but it's a low roll T1 rarity, and it's got the regen alongside it. That is a triple fractured item, which are more common nowadays. In the past, I've been able to sell any triple fractured item for 20 plus chaos because people want them for the challenge completion. But they recently made it so that triple fractured items drop more commonly from bosses and from some other sources that I forget. So this may not be worth anything. We'll be able to really quickly check that. The rolls, explicit rolls, are not worth something in there. T1 flask duration, but T1 is a pretty wide range on this. I don't know if 16 will be enough to affect any key implicits. Percent lightning damage. I'm actually just holding on to every jewel that I get because I have some crafting ideas that I want to pursue with those. And then cast speed while holding a shield and strength alongside lightning damage. Cool.
Fate awaits you.
So the first thing that we'll check is this triple fractured pair of gloves because this is really simple and easy. We're just going to see whether or not triple fractured gear in general still holds value. So we can look for a number of fractured modifiers, minimum 3. And see that it's no longer quite that expensive. So the rolls actually on this pair of gloves are not particularly good. I don't think anyone's going to be after what this is offering, so that'll just become vendor food. Alright, next thing that I want to look up is stun and block recovery on gloves. Stun, and once it loads, there we go. Block recovery gloves. And you see that gives chance to avoid being stunned, which there's certainly more powerful implicits than that people might be after, so we can vendor those off. Flask effect duration on a belt. Gives up to remove a shock when you use a flask, and then flask effect duration has an implicit, but this does require 50 across each, or sorry, 51 across all 3 belts, because you have to beat this tier. Well, actually, just beating 40 has some value. 15% flask effect duration is, honestly, in my mind, better than remove shock when you use a flask, because this is just something you can get on a grounding flask fairly easily. And this is remove shock, not become immune to shock. I mean, I'll throw it up for 5C, but with Stygians in the game, I very much doubt that this will actually sell. But we'll see. We'll see. There's no risk in throwing it up. And the other thing that I wanted to check was fire gained as... Oh, does that not have an implicit? Fire damage as extra chaos.
Triumphant
Fire damage, and thank you for the follow. I'm not live at the moment, but thank you for the follow. Fire damage as extra chaos damage gives percent increase. Let's narrow this down to shields. There we go. Gives 4 to 6 of fire damage gained as extra chaos damage, which is actually a decent implicit that can be had at 33 or higher, which means you need 11 across each. I only have 9. Yeah, we have middle roll T2 that doesn't actually quite reach the breakpoint necessary, and otherwise you just get percent increased fire damage. So that is vendor food, sadly, but that roll seems like it could be strong if I had a better roll of it. Given that I only had the tier 2, though, it is in fact vendor food. I'm going to hold on to these 2 jewels here. Let's transition back in game. And then we have the fractured ghastly eye jewel with T1 life regen. Actually, I'm going to leave your head spinning and transfer back over to the browser so we can look that up. But I doubt that's actually worth much. Life regenerated per second. Abyss Jewel? Yeah, Abyss Jewel is the name of the category. It gives percent life regen per second. This value is listed in life regenerated per minute, which is why it's so high. So we'd have to take our value, multiply by 60. To get how much we're regenerating per minute. But, I mean, I don't know, 0.2% per jewel slot could add up to be pretty decent, actually. I feel like that's not going to hold any value, though. Ghastly Eye Jewel. What eye level is this? 83. I wonder how many eye level 80 fractured Ghastly Eye Jewels there are in the first place. What the baseline price for that is. Alright, it's a chaos for like a bleh roll. And then we look for life regenerated per second. And we can skip down to the fractured one. 8 chaos and then 20 chaos, which is interesting. It's been up for 3 hours, though. I think maybe we want to take the eye level out of this, or at least be a little more generous with it so I can see more things to compare against. 8 and 20 again. Not very many of these on the market to compare against. Just for safety's sake, I'll throw it up for 10, but I very much doubt that will sell, and in the end, likely it'll just be vendor food or used for a project of mine. Let's finish out the rest of this tab, shall we?
Welcome.
I'm quite happy with the amount of investigation that I've had to do into these items. I was worried that we'd be sorting through all of them and not find anything worth checking. But it looks like this last little batch is not really anything worth checking. If that +1 to... Oh, if that was socketed gems, not bow gems. Things to look for in bows. +1 socketed gems, +2 socketed bow gems, light radius, as I mentioned earlier. Dang, now that I've started listing them, I'm probably going to miss one or two, but those are certainly some powerful things to look for in bows. Not any of those in place here, sadly.
See you soon.
Still, though, a few things learned today, and I hope more than anything, more than any specific role, you learned sort of the method by which you can help yourself to price check these things and figure out whether or not what you've got in your tab holds any real value. I hope to see you in the next one. Hope you enjoyed the episode, and have a good night.